The war in Ukraine is now entering its fourth year, and both sides continue to commit massive resources in an effort to tip the balance in their favor. Every meter of territory has become strategically valuable as Kyiv and Moscow clash not only on the battlefield, but also in tactical, strategic, and technological arenas. In retrospect, the onset of the conflict was marked by a stark imbalance of power. When the Russian Federation launched what it called a special military operation, Ukraine fielded a much smaller army, both in manpower and equipment. Russia, perceived as the world's second-largest military power, seemed unstoppable, and many analysts predicted that Ukraine's resistance would collapse within weeks. Those predictions were proven wrong. Not only did Ukraine hold its ground, but it also reclaimed territory through spectacular counteroffensives that took the international community by surprise. How was such an outcome possible? How did a nation with comparatively limited resources withstand a global military superpower? To answer these questions, we will examine the decisive moments from the conflict's early days, the key strategies underpinning Ukraine's defense, and the factors that shifted the course of the war. But first, it's important to review the initial context and the resources each side brought into the fight. In February 2022, when Russia launched its large-scale invasion, attacks were directed along multiple axes, targeting vital cities such as Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Mariupol. The Kremlin expected a rapid victory, banking on its numerical superiority, air dominance, and overwhelming firepower. Yet Ukraine, mindful of the risks since Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea, had spent years preparing for just such a scenario. Sustained Western support, in the form of modern equipment, weapons, and training, enabled Ukraine to upgrade and professionalize its armed forces. Ukrainian troops employed innovative tactics to offset the material advantages of the Russian military. The imbalance in raw numbers was pronounced at the outset. According to a CNN report from February 25, 2022, Russia maintained roughly 900,000 active duty troops, compared to about 196,000 in Ukraine. The disparity was even greater in the air forces, 165,000 Russian personnel versus 35,000 Ukrainians. For its initial offensive, Russia committed between 160,000 and 200,000 soldiers, out of some 300,000 ground troops available. Ukraine, in turn, mobilized around 120,000 infantrymen. Although significantly outnumbered, Ukrainian forces demonstrated remarkable adaptability, while Russia, despite widespread speculation, did not deploy all its available assets. This restraint stemmed from logistical challenges and hard-learned lessons of history. A substantial portion of Russia's ranks consists of short-term conscripts who, under Russian law, cannot be sent beyond the country's borders. This legal limitation harkens back to the Soviet experience in Afghanistan, where the USSR lost approximately 670,000 soldiers over a decade of conflict. However, this initial, limited deployment may also reflect deliberate tactics and long-term strategic planning. The war in Ukraine is not an isolated event, but rather an escalation of a dispute that began over a decade ago with the annexation of Crimea. In 2014, Russia managed to seize that territory with virtually no armed conflict. At that time, Moscow orchestrated a military coup in Crimea. Elite forces were rapidly deployed to the Sevastopol airport, taking both the local Ukrainian military and national defense structures by surprise. Russian troops quickly seized control of local institutions, replaced the leadership with Kremlin-loyal allies, and organized a controversial referendum that paved the way for Crimea's annexation by the Russian Federation. Exploiting Ukraine's political instability and social unrest, Russia employed a mix of military actions and hybrid tactics to minimize international backlash and accelerate the annexation process. When Vladimir Putin announced the special military operation in February 2022, the strategy appeared to be a scaled-up replica of the Crimea operation. The plan aimed for the swift overthrow of the Kyiv government, and the capture of the capital through a coordinated offensive. On the first day of the invasion, Russia launched a massive two-pronged attack on Kyiv. One key operation targeted Hostomel Airport, just outside the capital. Approximately 200 to 300 Russian soldiers, transported in 34 helicopters, were flown in from Belarus to seize this strategic hub, vital for military logistics. Simultaneously, mechanized ground forces advanced from both Belarus and Russia to reinforce the airport occupation. However, the operation met unexpected resistance. Russian airborne troops suffered heavy losses before reaching the airfield, and Ukrainian forces barricaded the runway to prevent its use. Although Ukraine's air defenses were eventually overwhelmed, they managed to shoot down at least 4 Russian aircraft. These engagements caused critical delays, buying Ukraine invaluable time to strengthen its defenses. Meanwhile, Russia's plans to rapidly airlift reinforcements, estimated between 1,000 and 5,000 troops, were thwarted by Ukrainian strikes on the runway, rendering it unusable. With reinforcements blocked and ground advances stalled by fiercer-than-anticipated resistance, the Russian military encountered significant challenges in adapting to the realities on the ground. This massive disparity in military hardware between Russia and Ukraine at the outset of the war posed daunting challenges for Ukrainian forces, but also created unexpected opportunities to blunt the Russian advance. Russia entered the conflict with an enormous arsenal, over 15,900 armored fighting vehicles, compared to Ukraine's roughly 3,300. In the air, Russia's dominance seemed unquestionable, boasting 10 times as many fighter jets and 17 times as many helicopters. Nevertheless, this enormous numerical advantage did not translate into long-term strategic success. A clear example of this failure was the use of tanks, long considered one of Russia's greatest strengths. Instead of providing a decisive advantage, they became a major vulnerability. In its attempt to advance rapidly on 3 simultaneous fronts, the Russian military deployed tanks without proper infantry or artillery support. This left them exposed to Ukrainian attacks. Using Western-supplied artillery and drones, Ukraine was able to turn Russian tanks into moving targets and eliminate them with surprising efficiency. As the Russian offensive slowed, numerous logistical issues emerged, further undermining Moscow's ability to sustain its military operations. Despite having a massive stockpile of equipment and vehicles, Russian supply convoys were poorly coordinated, vulnerable, and often exposed. These convoys moved through unsecured territory to reach the front lines, offering Ukraine the chance to strike from well-defended positions. Due to poor planning, the convoys frequently traveled in long, unprotected columns, meaning that if the first and last vehicles were destroyed, the entire column became trapped. One such tactical error led to the loss of a convoy of roughly 100 vehicles, highlighting serious coordination failures within the Russian ranks. Another critical issue was Russia's inability to fully encircle the Ukrainian capital. Although Kyiv was a major target, the city's southern routes remained open, allowing Ukrainian forces to receive reinforcements, supplies, and ammunition. This logistical gap ensured not only the continuity of Kyiv's defense, but also the possibility of launching surprise attacks on the flanks of the invading forces. In the north, natural barriers like the Dnipro River and its tributaries further complicated the Russian advance. Ukrainian forces skillfully exploited these features by opening hydroelectric dams to flood the surrounding areas, severely restricting access routes and making it difficult for Russian troops to resupply in the region. In addition to these Russian strategic and logistical missteps, one of the most crucial factors in Ukraine's resilience was the external military support it received even before the invasion. Starting in 2018, the United States supplied Ukraine with Javelin anti-tank missile systems, which proved highly effective against Russian armored vehicles. Furthermore, in January 2022, the United Kingdom delivered NLA anti-tank launchers. signaling an early recognition of the imminent Russian threat. These deliveries significantly strengthened Ukraine's defensive capabilities and gave it a crucial edge in the initial stages of the conflict. A defining moment of this international support was the provision of modern artillery systems to Ukraine. These systems played a key role in balancing the scales of power, enabling the Ukrainian military to respond effectively to Russian tactics, which largely relied on massive bombardments aimed at destroying infrastructure and exhausting enemy resources. Although Russia is the world's largest producer of artillery and munitions, Ukraine, with external assistance, managed to partially neutralize this advantage, demonstrating that technology and mobility can tip the balance even against superior numbers. In addition to advancements in artillery, Ukraine's success was also underpinned by the massive financial support provided by its allies. NATO and its partners have supplied Ukraine with over $240 billion in the form of financial aid, military equipment, ammunition, and humanitarian assistance. This economic backing allowed Ukraine to focus its internal resources on developing efficient and cost-effective solutions for the battlefield. A striking example of this is the use of drones, which have completely transformed the dynamics of modern warfare. Ukraine has maximized the potential of commercial and agricultural drones by adapting them for military use. Small, relatively inexpensive drones were equipped with grenades or anti-tank mines, becoming lethal weapons against armored vehicles and infantry. This approach was not only effective, but also extremely economical. A drone costing just a few $1,000s could destroy a Russian tank valued at $500,000, or force Russia to deploy expensive surface-to-air missiles to shoot it down. In some cases, swarms of cheap drones inflicted significant damage on Russian equipment, even if most were shot down. This asymmetric strategy allowed Ukraine to offset vast disparities in resources and inflict disproportionate losses on Russian forces. In essence, the war in Ukraine has demonstrated how accessible technology and innovation can shift the balance of power in a conflict, even against an adversary with far greater resources. This model was made possible by a combination of international support, effective strategies, and the adaptability of Ukrainian forces, who turned challenges into decisive opportunities on the battlefield. The drone war represented a major innovation in Ukraine's military strategy, shifting the tide of the conflict in its favor in many respects. Although Russia entered the war with a significant advantage in naval assets and air superiority, Ukraine quickly adapted and leveraged technology in innovative ways, including with maritime kamikaze drones that broke through blockades and dealt serious damage to Russia's Black Sea fleet. This effective use of technology was vital to Ukraine's defense. Another contributing factor to its success was the deployment of modern air defense systems, such as those provided by NATO, which helped maintain a balance against Russia's aerial capabilities. Despite Russia's theoretical advantage at the outset of the war, the lack of uncontested air superiority and the efficiency of Ukrainian defenses successfully mitigated aerial threats and maintained a high level of protection throughout the conflict. In this context, the question of whether Ukraine will fully repel Russia is complex and depends on several factors, including the continuation of international support and Ukraine's strategic adaptability in response to changing battlefield conditions. While Ukraine has proven capable of overcoming initial challenges and making significant progress, the ultimate success will depend on how well it manages the ongoing conflict, adapts to new challenges, and maintains pressure on Russia. It is clear that Ukraine has managed to turn many of Russia's initiatives against it, but the war is far from over. Meanwhile, Russian losses continue to rise, reaching the point where they must rely on North Korean soldiers to bolster their ranks. This could be a sign that the end of the war might be near. But what do you think? Will Ukraine succeed in fully repelling Russia?